Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm going to be returning to Commander the Great War after quite a bit of a hiatus. Part of the reason there was a bit of a wait was just some personal things going on. The other aspect was I got a new hard drive and a new boot drive, so I had to reformat my whole computer, and like the idiot that I am, I didn't back anything up. I backed some things up, but I didn't think to back up my saved games, so I lost all of them. Fortunately, in the case with Commander the Great War, I had emailed a copy of my save file to the team, the Lord's Games Studios team. They were helping me through an issue I was having before the most recent patch, which, by the way, fixed that issue. And so I had a copy of the most recent saved game actually in an email. That was the other reason for the delay. I was waiting for the patch to come out to fix a problem that I was having. But yeah, so the good news is the patch fixed the issue, and I still had a copy of the save game. So there you have it. That's where we are right now. And we're returning to Commander the Great War as we left off. It is April 26, 1917. The situation on the East Front looks pretty solid. The situation on the West Front is deteriorating pretty rapidly. So we'll see how long this thing lasts. I'll be honest, I'm not terribly confident in the end result for this battle. Like I said, the West Front is rapidly decaying. The Italian Front especially went from being very good to being very tenuous at best. We've still kind of got the enemy pinned in the western corner of northern Italy while we drive down the Italian peninsula. But as far as any hope of driving them out of Italy altogether is next to nothing. But yeah, that's where we pick up here. Now, I don't have a whole lot to talk about during the gameplay. This gameplay video is going to be a little bit rough. You're going to see some reverses here and there, and the situation is going to remain tenuous throughout. But one of the things I did want to talk about during this video was a couple of sites that I recommend you check out if you're really interested in World War I, as I assume you are if you've been watching this video series throughout. I know I've talked quite a bit of history throughout this series. It's a pretty long-running series, and I've also talked a lot about the gameplay. But one of the things that I thought was worth checking out, or recommending that you look into as we watch the British get ever more aggressive in the Suez and the situation kind of falling apart in the Caucasus region, and there you can see the French just took Venice. But one of the things that I recommend you checking out, I've never really listened to him or heard of him all that much. Dan Carlin has a podcast called Hardcore History, which looks at numerous different topics, and some of the older podcasts are a paid podcast, so it's like $1.99 an episode, which to be honest isn't bad when you consider at least the episodes I've been listening to are like 3 or 4 hours long. But he's got a podcast that's up for free. It's on his website, dancarlin.com, and no, I'm not getting paid anything for this, in his Hardcore History series, which looks at World War I. There's 6 episodes. They're called Blueprint for Armageddon. The first couple of episodes kind of start talking about the outbreak of war, and then the first couple of months, and then I haven't listened to all of it yet, but I'm thinking on episode 3 or 4, and then he kind of delves into more of kind of the military, the individual experience, which I know I talk in most of the history that I look at in my videos. I talk much more high level, less about what the individual soldier was going through and those types of experiences. Whereas in his podcast, he talks a lot about kind of the everyday life of the soldier during World War I and that experience. So it's been a little bit interesting. I'll admit the first-person view isn't the most interesting to me when it comes to history, which is odd because that certainly seems the direction that history and historiographies have gone in the last couple of years, last couple of decades really, is more of a focus on the individual history versus the high-level command type history, which really dominated history before the last couple of decades. But Carlin focuses a lot on the individual soldier and kind of the experience and some of the major points throughout the war. It's 6 episodes. They're all free. I know I mentioned some of his series had a cost. Those were for the older series. The Blueprint of Armageddon, all 6 series are downloadable for free, so I recommend you check them out. They're very well done. They're like 3 or 4 hours each, so if you've been plugging on through my series here and been interested in the history as we play through here, I can only imagine you'd be interested in that as well. So I recommend you check that out. Again, not getting paid anything, just something that I've been enjoying, and I know several of the people who've watched my series have kind of mentioned it, so I figured I'd check it out. And again, that's called Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. It's on dancarlin.com. This really sounds like an ad. Anyway, as you can see here, this last turn just ended, and our Western Front is not doing great. The Italian Front is doing worse, and all in all, things are falling apart pretty splendidly. Well, that was annoying and a little bit frustrating. I just had a 12-minute segment or so that I had recorded, and it all was lost because my voice was distorted, sounding like I was kind of speaking through static almost, and almost like I was a chipmunk. So, yeah, I've never had that happen before. Hopefully that's not a problem with my microphone or anything. Part of it could just be the fact that I mentioned in a previous video that we had been house sitting, and we recently got home back to our apartment, so everything was all getting set back up. And then my power supply actually was about to die. I was playing some Total War Attila the other day, and I noticed my computer would shut off every time I would try and play the game. And did a little bit of digging, and based on the age of my power supply and kind of the total amount of power that my system draws, basically the fact that every time I heard the power supply start to spin up, I could hear it kind of dying. It would sound like the power supply's fan would attempt to spin up to try and basically compensate for the extra load being put on it, and then it would just completely die. So had to replace that with unexpected expense, but anyway, here we are. So anyway, I guess what you can see now is my best hope for winning a victory at this point is on the Eastern Front. I think that's pretty clear. And my best chance of winning on the Eastern Front appears to be on the southern flank, kind of on the eastern, well, I guess on our right flank, on the southern flank itself, in kind of Ukraine and Romania. In those areas, the Russians have pulled some troops back to deal with our invasion in the Caucasus by the Ottomans, and that expanding into southern Ukraine. So as far as that's caused that front to be a little bit short of manpower, and the additional casualties and whatnot that the Russians have lost throughout the rest of the campaign certainly is going to impact their ability to continue to fight. Now, Russia does still have massive manpower reserves, but the national will factor is hopefully going to kill them. I've kind of grown a little bit disillusioned with my ability to win a political victory after my experience in Italy of basically overrunning the entire country and not having any kind of notice that you beat them. Even if the Western allies continue fighting in Italy, it'd still be nice to know, the Italians have kind of pulled out of the war, which they haven't, and the situation there grows ever more desperate. So, again, I'm not totally confident in my ability to overrun the Russians. I'm really worried that I'm going to have to drive all the way to the east, to kind of the easternmost portions of the map, and that will be the only way to win a victory there. Hopefully that's not the case, but again, it just kind of feels like it's going to be with the way that things have shaped up. So our best hope really at this point, things are getting pretty desperate. The Allies in the West have a huge superiority in artillery and air power. So there's really only two ways that I see winning. One of them is being able to pick off individual units in the Western Front as they kind of advance and pray to high heaven that the Allies don't have much in the way of manpower reserves. And while the Allies are going to grind me down with their air and artillery, if we can knock out different units of theirs here and there, and they have to replace those frontline units with infantry, if they lack the manpower to do so or the industrial capacity to do so, because they have had some pretty substantial casualties already. There were a couple of incidents on the Western Front where we destroyed 4 or 5 French units apiece in individual situations. And if the Western allies are unable to do that because they've committed all of their industrial their dwindling industrial points and their dwindling industrial capacity toward maintaining those very expensive air and artillery units, if they commit themselves to maintaining that force and they start losing infantry units as they advance further and further that we can pick off here and there, it may allow us to essentially then fight weak units against ground units like air units and artillery units with our infantry units if they don't have the ability to maintain that solid front line. That's a bit of a far-fetched hope, I think, in my opinion, especially considering the British have really lost next to nothing when it comes to troops. The French have lost very heavily, but the British have really not. The other hope, which I believe is a far-fetched hope as well, I could probably get a better sense of this if I looked at the management screen, but the other hope is that just national will is too low. The British have lost 3 battleships, I believe it is. The Germans have lost none. And those battleship victories are really what's holding up German national morale. You can see there we're at 122% for our national morale, which is quite high. I don't imagine that the British are at that level. We're also there because, again, I believe you get a boost in your national morale points when you destroy an enemy unit, and we have destroyed a whole bunch of units, despite the fact that we're starting to lose units as well. We rarely lose entire units, at least the Germans. The Ottomans have been, but the Germans have not been losing individual units in their entirety. They get weakened down, and then we end up basically pulling them from the front line and trying to rebuild them, whereas the Western Allies have lost quite a few individual units, which has helped, again, give us a sense of victory, even when there may not be one. And I'd say our third best chance, or third opportunity, I know I started out with 2, but I'd say our third opportunity for victory lies on the Russian front, and that being us being able to just completely destroy the Russian field army and win a victory there so we can start pulling troops west. And even that isn't assured because of the way the Allies are now completely outclassing us in terms of artillery and infantry, or artillery and air support. Pulling massive amounts of troops might just be akin to bringing in massive amounts of cannon fodder. But it will at the very least delay the situation on the Western Front and allow us a chance of, if not victory, at least a stalemate. I think our best hope for that is because the Russians, again, have pulled troops east to deal with our invasion of now Ukraine, but it started out in the Caucasus, and that's opened up the southern front, and we've started to flank and destroy a bunch of Russian units there, as well as some Romanian troops. And that essentially opening up the line allows us to turn the Russians, and if we can destroy their units, I believe at this point they're at a point where they're really having difficulty recruiting full new units due to their casualties, and as that front kind of opens up and we get around their flank, we can just kind of create a domino effect where we slowly roll that line up and destroy those troops until we've destroyed the army. Now, my hope is that in the next 3 or 4 turns, we have beaten the Russians entirely. That may not be entirely accurate either. I think the best chance for us winning a victory in Russia, or the most realistic chance, is not so much a total victory where we destroy the entire Russian army and pull everything back all at once, but rather kind of a phased victory where what's going to end up happening most likely is, as we start to roll up this line, we'll be able to pull back individual units here and there to help plug the gaps that are already opening up on the Western Front and form some kind of stabilized front. The concern in doing that is that if you start pulling those troops back before the Russians are totally beaten, then sure, you may stabilize the Western Front, but you may also allow the Russians to stabilize their front as well, which would, again, not be very good in terms of a chance of absolute victory, but that it is what it is. That's kind of the situation where we're at. Now you can see here we've started isolating some units, and I've also started disbanding a few units here and there in an attempt to give the Ottomans a chance to build some upkeep so that they can try and replace some of their casualties. The problem is that doesn't seem to be enough. We just have way too many troops in uniform, way too high manpower costs, and not nearly enough industry left due to our manpower shortages to really be able to do anything. And as a result, we are almost in a fatal funnel type situation where, or a fatal death spiral, in one of those situations in a game where you may have lost and not even realized it yet until 20 turns later. I'm hoping we're not there yet. I think there's probably some really intelligent strategies that we could follow to manage to stabilize things, but I may not be the player to carry those out. All right, and going back to one other aspect in this video is, I don't mean to make this a plug video, since I know I already kind of talked about Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast and kind of blueprint for Armageddon, but these are a few things that I do think people who've watched this series will enjoy, because I know this has obviously been a series that's been ongoing for quite some time, and there's certainly enough time to fill in these videos with a few other things. So again, not getting any kind of kickback to do what I'm doing here, but I did want to talk a little bit about one other thing that I think a lot of people who are interested in World War I are probably going to find interesting, and that's a series on YouTube called The Great War. That's actually the name of the channel, is The Great War. It's a YouTube channel that has, for the last year plus, well, no, not quite a year, for the last roughly 1 year, they've been doing a weekly episode which basically looks at what happened 100 years ago today during the Great War, which I thought was really an interesting idea. I've done a little bit of it myself with a few different events, like I know with Scourge of War, Gettysburg. I did videos on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of the 150th anniversary, where I talked about those individual battles or engagements on those days of the Battle of Gettysburg, kind of commemorating the 150th. And I've done that with a few other battles as well. But what this channel is doing, what the Great War is doing, is every week they post an episode and show what happened exactly 100 years ago. And essentially what they've done, again, they 100 years ago, they'll do an episode about what happened for that week of the Great War. So, they've already been going on for almost a year. They've got another 3 years to go. And they show an episode. But they don't just do that. What they've also done is they've introduced some other additional episodes, so sort of a who's who's type thing. During World War I, they have some episodes that talk about important figures that were around during World War I, what they did, their impact on the war. They've also had a few kind of introductory episodes which talked about the lead up to the Great War, and also some other things like, the different technological inventions that they've also looked at as well. So they've had some bonus episodes, but the core of the channel is that weekly look at the Great War, which for something that is massive and as long-running as World War I was, I think is an amazingly ambitious project. You're looking at 4 years of episodes. That's over, the war lasted over 200 weeks, so that would be over 200 episodes just for that core aspect. It's almost a Ken Burnsian, if that's a new phrase or whatever, almost a Ken Burns style look at World War I, but at a very, very detailed level. And the reason that really interests me a lot is, there's been a lot, and I think Dan Carlin's podcast kind of fits into this, and pretty much every documentary I've ever seen really fits into this mold really well, in that World War I is often covered in great detail for the first 3 months. You look at every little thing, all the little battles, all the little, engagements, everything, the home front. Basically, you look at that First World War for those first 3 months, really July, August, September, until the Battle of the Marne comes. And then once the Battle of the Marne comes, then most histories kind of break down a bit, and they start looking at, let's look at the home front here, or let's look at just the battles of Verdun and the Somme and some of the other really big battles. And they just kind of generalize the rest of the conflict into there were trenches, or they'll look at Gallipoli. But it's a very fragmented look at the First World War. It doesn't seem as coherent or as logical to follow. And this series has the potential to, do something different. And I'll be honest, it kind of is one of the things that inspired me to come back to this series of game or episodes, whatever. It's been months since my last episode, and again, the whole hard drive situation kind of threw things into a loop, and what have you. But when I was kind of scrolling through the internet, and I ran into this channel. It's just, like I said, it's called The Great War. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is a really neat thing, and I'm really great that someone's doing this. So I figured, why don't I go back to The Great War? Because it seems like a lot of people really have enjoyed this series and it's a long-running series. This is episode, 23 or something like that by now? And it seems like a lot of people have enjoyed this, but I just don't have the knowledge or the time or the commitment to delve into this in as much detail as I would like. And I talk about the gameplay a bit, whereas this series is just talking about the history for every single week of the Great War. So I figured, I should go back to Commander the Great War, but I also I wanted to talk about this channel again. I'm not getting anything for doing this, but it's really an interesting look. So if you're interested in these videos, and frankly, if you're still watching this video, I think you're probably interested in the history of it as well, more than just the gameplay. So if that's something that does interest you, I highly recommend you check it out, because it's a really unique look at the First World War. And I think is definitely worth your time, because it goes into so much more detail than anything I've seen before it. But anyway, coming back to the battlefield here, you can see here we're stemming the tide a bit in the Caucasus front, or in the Ukraine front. Really need to be conscious of where the Russians are, though. That's a very narrow and risky front that we have near Kursk, because simply the Russians can swing some troops into our southwest and cut that entire force off and destroy it. Meanwhile, in the Sinai, the British have finally broken through kind of this position at the head of the Sinai, with increasing levels of coordination between their forces. They've broken between our two forces, and we're railing some reserves, hopefully to stem the tide along kind of a Damascus, Lebanon kind of front line, a Beirut to Damascus front line. Hopefully we'll be able to stem the tide, but the British are going to take Palestine and Jerusalem back, and they've split our front, so they could turn and destroy either one of our armies on either the left or right, and kind of in detail, as they've broken our center. So a very risky and dangerous situation there. Hopefully we can stem the tide with that one reserve unit which we brought in, which should have some time to dig in, but the Ottoman Empire may be in some serious trouble. Again, I think I've got about 4 or 5 turns left until the situation in the West, and maybe now the Middle East, will devolve into a serious crisis. So I've really got to put the pressure on the Russians, but there's no point in launching frontal attacks, because as you've seen, I don't have enough resources to replace my losses. I don't have enough income to cover our upkeep, which means I'm not going to be getting additional reinforcements, except when individual convoy ships come through for the Germans. So what that basically means is I need to be very careful with my troops on the East Front, while at the same time I need to put increasing amounts of pressure on the Russians to hopefully break their lines, as you see me not being terribly careful with that Russian unit there on the northern front. But essentially, I've now decided maybe a double envelopment with these troops here in the north and the troops in the south might be the best route, or might be practical, but I guess we'll see what happens here. The southern flank, we're still meeting with more success. The Russians kind of surprised me with a few units there along the Black Sea coast, but again, no point in launching frontal attacks. The main goal is to just get around the Russians, cut them off, and hopefully bag large numbers of troops quickly within 4 or 5 turns, so I can begin deploying troops to the rest of the fronts. We probably don't have enough rail units to do it all at once anyway, so even if the Russians all disappeared, it would take us several turns before we'd be able to get those troops west. But again, that's the hope here, is that we're able to hopefully defeat the Russians here. You can see that armored car unit just destroyed one of our units there, and kind of underlaid our weakness with our flank. If they were to come in and sweep in behind us, this position here near Kursk is pretty tenuous. But anyway, that's the situation right now, and so yeah, that's the situation right now, and hopefully we're able to turn things around here pretty shortly. But I guess we'll see. I think what I'll look at maybe doing in some of the future videos of the series, again, I'm going to play the series out, even if it ends in a very nasty and hard-fought defeat, which, to be honest, seems like the direction things are going. But even if that's the direction that things go, I still want to try and play the thing out all the way until the end. So that's what we're going to try and do. And I think what I'll talk about in kind of the next couple of videos, or next, however long it lasts, is going to be kind of the transition to the late war period. I know I've done, I mentioned not liking kind of the approach that a lot of people have done with the Great War, and I've kind of been guilty of that myself, with a very sporadic and haphazard approach of the war itself. So again, certainly something I'm not innocent from. But I think what I'm going to look at in the next couple of videos is going to be the late war transition, maybe somewhat about the German drives in the spring of 1918, and then also kind of talking about the just total, utter collapse of the Western Front from the Germans in the very late war period, right up to the surrender. I think that'll be appropriate, especially the situation that we're in right now, to be honest. With as bleak as things are, that's probably the most true to where we're at right now. situation. So I think that's what we'll look at. We'll look at the late war, and that's what we'll do in the coming videos. Meanwhile, guys, this video is coming to a close, so I appreciate you tuning in with me. The video is a little bit more rambly than I would like. Sadly, I feel like I say that almost every single video. So maybe my YouTube channel has devolved into me rambling and you listening. I hope not. I hope to provide worthwhile history and discussion of games as well. So again, I appreciate you guys tuning in. If this is something that you continue to enjoy, please continue to support it, like it, leave comments and all of that in the description. I really do appreciate when you guys do that, and just kind of when you guys watch the stuff. I just hit 1 million views for my channel in its history, and I just hit 5,000 subscribers about a month ago. I meant to do a thank you video, and I may still do that. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. A lot going on here on the home front. But anyway, again, I appreciate you guys a lot for supporting and doing all that you do. And until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying, wish me the best of luck in this series because things aren't going well. Wish me the best of luck. Hopefully the Central Powers can, pull things together and figure out a way to win a victory. If not, hopefully at least our destruction will be entertaining. You don't usually see people post videos on YouTube of them losing a game. Maybe I'm one of the few. I have no problem sharing the fact that I've struggled to be successful, and I think that's a testament to the game being pretty good and well done. So certainly has given me a lot of enjoyment, and I hope it's given you guys some. But that is going to be just about it. Again, I'm rambling in my conclusion. So until next time, guys, I really do appreciate you tuning in. And this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.